Sterling Beaumont had always believed that he could read a room within seconds of walking into it. It was a skill he had refined across 32 years of building one of the largest private real estate firms in the Southeast, a skill that had carried him through hostile negotiations, through tense board meetings, through quiet rooms where men in expensive suits decided the fates of buildings, neighborhoods, and sometimes entire cities. He had learned to notice the small things. The slight shift of weight when a man was about to lie. The careful neutrality of a face that had already decided to say no. The patient stillness of a person waiting for you to make a mistake. What he had not learned in any of those 32 years was how to read the face of a woman he had never seen before who walked up to him in the lobby of a four-star hotel in downtown Atlanta on a Wednesday morning and quietly told him that if he got into the elevator that was waiting for him, he would not see the end of the day. She was small. That was the first thing he noticed. She could not have been more than 5 feet tall, and she stood with the slightly hunched posture of a woman who had carried things for a long time. She wore a faded brown coat that had been pressed but not recently replaced, and a soft gray scarf wrapped twice around her neck. Her hair, what he could see of it under a knitted cap, was silver. Her hands, folded in front of her, were thin and dark and steady. She did not look like a person who was used to approaching strangers in hotel lobbies. She looked like a person who would normally apologize for being in someone's way, but her eyes, when they found his, were not the eyes of an apologetic woman. "Mr. Beaumont," she said. Her voice was low, almost beneath the sound of the lobby music. "Stay quiet. Follow me." Sterling stopped where he was. He had been crossing the polished marble floor of the Sterling Atlanta Hotel, his phone in one hand and his coffee in the other, his eyes already on the row of elevators ahead of him. He had a meeting on the 18th floor at 9 o'clock with 3 investors from Charlotte who had flown in the night before. He had not slept enough. He had not eaten anything since the small piece of toast he had managed at 6. He was in every measurable way exactly the kind of distracted that the morning expected him to be. He looked down at the woman. She was perhaps 70 years old, possibly older. He had never seen her before in his life. "I'm sorry," he said, with the practiced patience of a man who had been approached by strangers in hotel lobbies more times than he could count. "I think you may have me confused with someone else." "No, sir," she said quietly. "I do not have you confused. I have been waiting for you in this lobby since 5 o'clock this morning. Please, follow me. Do not get on that elevator." There was something in the way she said it that made him pause. It was not desperation. It was not the urgency of a person trying to scam him or sell him something. It was the calm, exhausted certainty of a person who had already played out the conversation in her head 100 times during the night, and who knew exactly how little time she had to say what she needed to say. He glanced toward the elevators. A bellhop was holding one of them open with a polite smile, waiting for him. The doors of another had just closed behind a businessman in a navy suit. The morning continued in its ordinary way. Nothing about the scene suggested danger. Nothing about the marble floor or the soft music or the smell of fresh coffee from the lobby cafe suggested that anything in the world was wrong. And yet the woman in front of him was still standing there, looking up at him with eyes that did not blink, eyes that seemed to be measuring something behind his face that he could not see himself. "Ma'am," he said, more gently this time, "I have a meeting in 8 minutes. Whatever this is, your meeting is not real," she said. Sterling went very still. She did not raise her voice. She did not look around to see if anyone was listening. She simply held his gaze, and in the space of those 4 small words, the lobby of the Sterling Atlanta Hotel rearranged itself around him in a way he could not yet explain. "What did you say?" he asked. "Your meeting is not real," she repeated. "The 3 men from Charlotte are not in the building. There is no investor presentation. The room on the 18th floor is empty, but the man waiting there is not coming to discuss real estate. Please, Mr. Beaumont, there is very little time. Stay quiet. Follow me." For a long moment, Sterling did not move. He looked down at the small woman in the brown coat. He looked at the elevator where the bellhop was still smiling, still waiting. He looked at his phone, where the calendar entry for 9 o'clock glowed in pale blue against the screen. Charlotte Group, Suite 1840. He had confirmed it himself the night before. His assistant had sent the meeting brief at 11:30. Everything about it was exactly as it should be. Everything except that the woman in front of him knew the floor number, the room number, the city, the morning. And she knew them with the quiet certainty of a person who had not learned any of it from his calendar. "How do you know about the meeting?" he asked carefully. "Because I am the one who was asked to deliver you to it," she said. Sterling Beaumont did not move for several long seconds. He stood in the middle of the lobby with his coffee cooling in his hand and his phone still glowing softly between his fingers, and he looked down at the small woman in the brown coat as if she had just spoken to him in a language he had once known as a child and had since forgotten. "What did you just say?" he asked again, more quietly this time. "I said I was the one asked to deliver you to that room," she replied. Her voice did not change. It stayed at the same low and patient register, the register of a woman who had decided long before this morning that she would say what she needed to say only once and then let the world do what it would do. "I was paid $3,000 2 weeks ago to make sure you walked into the elevator at exactly 5 minutes before 9. I was told to stand near the front desk, to greet you warmly, and to say that the men from Charlotte had asked me to escort you upstairs." Sterling felt the cold begin in his fingertips and travel slowly inward. He had spent his life in rooms where small numbers carried enormous weight, and $3,000 was the kind of number a person paid to a stranger to perform a single small task without asking questions. It was the kind of number that suggested the people behind it did not want the woman to know what would happen on the other side of the elevator doors. It was the kind of number that meant she had been chosen specifically because she would not survive long enough afterward to be a problem. "Who paid you?" he asked. "A man," she said. "Not the man waiting upstairs. A different man. He came to me in the laundromat where I worked 3 Tuesdays ago. He sat down across from me with an envelope in his hand, and he said he had been told I was a woman who could be trusted to do a job and not ask questions. He said the job was easy. He said all I had to do was greet a tall man in a gray suit at 9 in the morning and walk him to the elevator. He said the man was a friend of the family and that there was going to be a surprise birthday celebration in the suite upstairs." "And you believed him?" "No, sir," she said. "I did not believe him for one moment." Sterling looked at her more carefully. He saw now what he had missed in the first quick assessment. The faded brown coat was not faded from age alone. It was faded from being washed too many times, from being worn through too many winters by a woman who could not afford to replace it. The knitted cap had been mended at the seam with thread that did not quite match. The shoes on her feet were sensible and clean and very old. She was a woman who had counted every dollar she had ever held, and 3,000 of them was not a sum she could refuse without first understanding exactly what she was refusing. "Then why did you take the money?" he asked. "Because I needed to know who you were," she said. "Because the moment that man said your name, I needed to know if it was the same Sterling Beaumont who had grown up in Macon, Georgia, in a small white house off Vineville Avenue, and whose mother had worked at a hospital laundry for 27 years before her heart gave out." The lobby of the Sterling Atlanta Hotel went very quiet around Sterling Beaumont. He could still hear the soft music. He could still hear the faint clink of cups from the cafe behind him. He could still hear the polite voice of the bellhop calling out to a guest near the front desk. But all of those sounds had moved a great distance away, and what was close, what was suddenly the only thing close, was the face of the small woman in the brown coat, looking up at him with eyes that he now realized he had seen before. He had seen them in a photograph. He had seen them in the only photograph he had ever owned of the woman who had given birth to him before disappearing from his life when he was 3 years old. "My mother died," he said slowly. "She died when I was a boy. I was told she died. You were told what they needed you to believe," she said, "so that the family that adopted you could move forward without the complication of a woman they did not want in your life." Sterling could not speak. He felt the weight of the coffee cup in his hand and the weight of the phone in the other and the weight of 32 years of decisions he had made about who he was and where he had come from, and all of it suddenly felt as if it were balanced on a single thin thread that was about to snap. "Ma'am," he said. His voice came out smaller than he meant it. "Who are you?" She looked at him for a long moment. And then, very gently, she answered. "My name is Lillian Hayes," she said. "And once, a long time ago, before they took you from me and told everyone I was gone, I was the woman who held you for the first 3 years of your life." Sterling Beaumont did not remember setting the coffee cup down. He did not remember slipping his phone into his jacket pocket. He did not remember, in any conscious way, deciding to follow the small woman in the brown coat across the lobby of the Sterling Atlanta Hotel, past the front desk, past the row of upholstered chairs where two businessmen were quietly arguing over a tablet, past the wide glass doors that led out to the side street where the morning was still cold and pale with light. He only knew, as they stepped together onto the sidewalk and Lillian Hayes turned left without looking back to see if he was behind her, that some part of him that had been silent for a very long time was now awake and listening, and that the rest of him would have to catch up. She walked quickly for a woman her size. She did not stop at the corner. She did not look back. She crossed the small side street and turned into the narrow alley that ran behind the hotel, and Sterling followed her with the briefcase he had somehow remembered to keep in his hand, and the coat he had somehow remembered to button against the cold. At the far end of the alley, beside a row of green dumpsters and a single old brick wall covered in faded paint, she stopped. "There is a coffee shop on the next block," she said quietly. "It is small. It is not the kind of place where men like the one upstairs would think to look. We can sit there. I will tell you what I know, and then you will decide what to do." "Mrs. Hayes, Lillian," she said, "please, I am not Mrs. Hayes to you. I have never been Mrs. Hayes to you. I was Lillian once when you knew the sound of my voice, and I would like to be Lillian again now, if only for the time it takes to tell you the truth." Sterling looked down at her. The cold of the alley was sharper than the cold of the lobby had been, and her thin coat was not enough for the morning, and yet she stood there with the same patient stillness she had carried when she had walked up to him 15 minutes earlier. She was not asking him to believe her. She was simply telling him what was true and letting him decide how much of it he was ready to hold. "All right," he said. "Lillian." She nodded once, almost imperceptibly, and turned and began walking again. The coffee shop was called the Marigold. It was tucked between a dry cleaner and a small bookstore that had not yet opened for the day, and its front window was steamed at the edges from the warmth of the ovens behind the counter. A bell rang softly when they stepped inside. The smell of cinnamon and dark coffee folded around them like a blanket that had been waiting. There were only 3 other customers, and none of them looked up. Lillian walked to a small table at the very back, near the kitchen door, where 2 old wooden chairs were tucked against a brick wall. She sat down with the careful slowness of a woman whose knees did not bend the way they used to, and she folded her hands on the table in front of her, and she waited for Sterling to sit across from her. He did. He set his briefcase on the floor beside his foot. He did not take off his coat. He had a strange feeling that if he made himself too comfortable, the spell of the morning would break, and Lillian Hayes would dissolve back into whatever part of his memory she had walked out of, and he would find himself sitting alone at a table he did not recognize, 10 minutes late for a meeting that no longer existed. A young woman came to the table and asked if they wanted coffee. Lillian said yes, please, with a little milk. Sterling said the same. The young woman went away. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Sterling looked at the small woman across from him. He looked at the soft gray scarf around her neck, at the silver curl of hair just visible beneath the edge of her cap, at the thin lines of her hands resting one on top of the other in a posture he could not place but that felt, in some place inside him that did not have words, deeply and impossibly familiar. "I do not know where to start," he said finally. "Then let me start," she said. She drew in a small breath. She did not look down at the table. She kept her eyes on his face the way a mother looks at a son she has not seen in a very long time and has decided not to waste the second she has been given. You were born on the 14th of April, 1968, she said quietly, at 4:12 in the morning at a small clinic on the south side of Macon. You weighed 6 pounds and 11 ounces. You had a small mark on the left side of your neck, just beneath the ear, shaped like a comma. You cried for almost 2 hours straight after they put you in my arms, and I sang to you the same song my own mother used to sing to me. And somewhere in the second hour you stopped crying and you looked at me, and I have remembered the shape of your eyes every day for 58 years. Sterling sat very still. He had a small mark on the left side of his neck, just beneath the ear. He had been told all his life that it was a birthmark of no significance. He had never thought to ask whether anyone had been there to see it the first time. "Go on," he said quietly. Lillian Hayes did not begin immediately. She waited until the young woman had returned to the table and set down 2 small white cups of coffee and a small ceramic pitcher of milk between them. She waited until the young woman had walked away again. And only then, when the soft hiss of the espresso machine behind the counter had picked back up and covered the room in a steady veil of ordinary sound, did she lift her cup with both hands and take one small sip. "Your father's name was James," she said. "James Beaumont. He was a tall, quiet man who worked the night shift at the freight yard outside Macon. He was 31 years old when I met him. I was 24. We were married for almost 4 years before you were born. We did not have much. We had a small white house off Vineville Avenue, 2 rooms and a kitchen and a porch that leaned a little to the left. We had a record player your father had repaired himself. We had a garden in the back where I grew tomatoes and collard, and a small bed of marigolds that gave this coffee shop its name in my memory the moment I walked past it last week." Sterling set his own cup down very carefully. The name James Beaumont had been on his birth certificate. He had seen it once, when he was 14 years old, in a drawer in the study of the man who had raised him. He had been told that James Beaumont was a name his birth parents had given him before they had both passed away within a year of each other, and that the people who had adopted him had kept the surname out of respect for the dead. He had not questioned it. He had been a boy. He had been taught not to ask questions about the part of his life that came before the people who fed him and clothed him and sent him to school. "James died," Lillian continued quietly, "when you were 2 years old. He was working a late shift. There was an accident in the yard. A coupling on a freight car gave way. He was beneath it. I was told later that it had been very fast and that he had not suffered, and I do not know to this day whether that was true or whether it was the gentle kind of lie that men in uniforms tell to women they do not know how to comfort." She paused. She looked down at her coffee for the first time since they had sat down. Sterling could see, in the small lines around her mouth, that she had practiced this story 1,000 times in private, and that this was the first time she had ever said any of it out loud to the only person it had ever been meant for. "After James died," she said, "I tried for almost a year to keep us in the house. I worked at the hospital laundry. I worked weekends cleaning at a church. I took in mending for the women who lived on the other side of Vineville. It was not enough. The mortgage on that small house was more than I could meet, and the bank did not care that I was a widow with a small child, and the kind of work a woman like me could find in Macon in 1970 was not the kind of work that could keep a roof over a baby's head." She lifted her cup again. Her hand trembled slightly. She steadied it. "Your father's brother came to see me in the spring of 1971, she said. "His name was Walter Beaumont. He was a banker in Atlanta. He had married into money. He and his wife had been trying to have a child of their own for almost 10 years and had not been able to. They had heard about James. They had heard about the house. They had heard about me. He sat at my kitchen table for almost 4 hours, Sterling. He drank the coffee I made him. He told me that he and his wife could give you everything I could not. A good school, a good neighborhood, music lessons, trips, a future. He told me that they had spoken to a lawyer and that there was a way to do it cleanly, a way to do it where you would never be confused about who your parents were." She drew in a small breath. "He told me that the cleanest way would be to tell you that I was gone, that James and I had both passed, that you were an orphan. He said that children adapt better when there is no door behind them that they might wonder about. He said that if I loved you, I would close the door myself. Sterling could not feel his hands. And you closed it, he said quietly. I closed it, she said. I signed the papers. I let them take you. I watched the back of their car pull away from the curb outside that small white house on a Tuesday morning in May, and I sat down on the porch step and I did not move from it for almost 6 hours. And then I went inside, and I put away the small clothes that no longer fit you in a box under the bed, and I went to work the next morning at the hospital laundry, and I did not stop working there for 27 years. She lifted her eyes back to his. I did not know, Sterling, she said. I did not know that they would tell you I had died. I thought you would be told that I was alive somewhere and that I had given you a better life. I thought that one day, when you were old enough, you might come looking. And every year on the 14th of April, I sat by the telephone in case that was the year you found me. And every year, the telephone did not ring. Sterling Beaumont sat across from her in the small back corner of the Marigold, and for a long moment he did not trust himself to speak. He looked down at his coffee. He looked at the wood grain of the small table between them. He looked at the thin, dark hands folded patiently on the other side of it, and he understood. In the slow way a man understands a thing he has spent his whole life trying not to look at, that he was sitting across from the only person in the world who had ever held him as a newborn and counted his fingers and decided, in that first long hour after his birth, what kind of life she would try to give him. Walter Beaumont. He knew the name. He had grown up calling that name Father. He had buried Walter Beaumont 6 years ago in a cemetery north of Atlanta, in a service attended by 300 people, with a casket draped in white lilies and a eulogy that Sterling himself had written and delivered. He had spent the better part of a week afterward going through Walter's papers, signing what the lawyers told him to sign, accepting condolences from men who had known his adoptive father longer than they had known their own wives. He had loved Walter Beaumont. He had loved him in the careful, slightly distant way a boy loves a father who is generous with school fees and silent at the dinner table, and he had grieved him honestly when he was gone. And Walter Beaumont, for 58 years, had let him believe that the woman sitting across from him at this table was buried somewhere in a small graveyard in Macon. Lillian, Sterling said. His voice did not sound like his own. Why now? She nodded slowly. She had known the question would come. She had known the order in which all of his questions would come. Because 2 weeks ago, she said, a man sat down across from me at the laundromat where I worked the night shift, and he handed me an envelope with $3,000 in cash, and he said your name. And I knew then that whatever had been kept from you for 55 years was about to end one way or another. And I decided that if I had only one morning left in this life, I would not let it end the wrong way. The man at the laundromat, Sterling said. Who is he? I do not know his name, she said. He did not give one. He was a tall man, white, maybe 50 years old. He had a small scar along the edge of his jaw on the right side. He wore a dark coat and a dark cap. He spoke softly. He did not threaten me. He did not need to. There are men whose voices do not need to threaten you for you to understand exactly what they are saying. And he told you to bring me to the elevator. He told me to bring you to the elevator, she said, and to make sure you went up to the 18th floor at exactly 5 minutes before 9. He said the men from Charlotte had asked for a familiar face to greet you. He said it would be a small kindness for a busy man. He said all I had to do was be in the lobby at 8:45, dressed neatly, and that when you walked in he would signal me from the corner by the front desk and I would walk up to you and use your name. Did he signal you this morning? He was there, she said quietly. He is still there, Sterling. He was standing by the front desk in a dark coat reading a newspaper when I walked up to you. He saw me speak to you. He saw you stop, and he did not see what I said. But he saw you put your coffee down on the table by the elevator instead of getting in. And by now he has called whoever he answers to and told them that the woman they paid $3,000 to is not the woman they thought she was. Sterling felt the cold begin to move through him again, the same cold that had begun in the lobby and had been pushed aside by the larger weight of what Lillian had told him. He had been so absorbed in the impossible shape of her face across from his that he had forgotten, for almost 10 minutes, that there was a man on the 18th floor of a hotel 2 blocks away who had paid a great deal of money to be in a room with him at 9 o'clock, and who had now been told that the room would be empty. "Why me?" he said. "Why would anyone want me in that room?" Lillian was quiet for a long moment. "I do not know all of it," she said. "I am an old woman in a brown coat who works in a laundromat on the south side of Macon. The men who pay $3,000 to strangers do not explain themselves. But I am not a fool, Sterling. I have lived a long time. And in the 2 weeks since that man sat down across from me, I have done what an old woman with a library card and a careful heart can do. I have read the papers. I have watched the news. I have asked the right kind of questions in the right kind of places." She lifted her eyes to his. "You are a man who buys land," she said, "and there is a stretch of land somewhere near a river outside this city that other men want very badly. And the only reason they want it badly enough to do this kind of thing is because of what is underneath it, or what is going to be built on top of it, or what is going to be voted on next month by people who would vote very differently if you were no longer in the room." Sterling stared at her. "The Caldwell Tract," he said quietly. "I do not know the name," she said. "But you do." Sterling Beaumont knew the name very well. He had been carrying the name in his head for almost 11 months. He had walked the land twice, once in the late spring and once in early fall, with the cuffs of his trousers damp from the long grass and the cold smell of the river in his nose. He had stood at the edge of the Caldwell Tract on a bright Saturday morning in October and looked across the slow brown curve of the Chattahoochee at the highway interchange on the far side, and he had understood, in the way a man understands a thing that does not need to be explained, what the next 20 years of that piece of ground were going to look like. 460 acres, old farmland, held by a single family for almost a century. The Caldwells were 3 siblings now, all of them past 70, none of them with children who wanted the land. They had hired a small firm out of Atlanta to handle the sale. There had been 7 serious offers. 6 of them had come from a single consortium of investors operating under 3 different shell companies, and the 7th had come from Sterling Beaumont. The Caldwells had chosen Sterling. They had not yet signed. The signing was scheduled for the following Monday morning at 10 o'clock, in a conference room on the 22nd floor of the First Atlanta building, 4 blocks from the hotel where Lillian Hayes had stopped him in the lobby 23 minutes earlier. If Sterling Beaumont was not in that conference room on Monday morning, the deal would collapse. The Caldwells would not wait. They had been clear about that from the beginning. There was a backup offer waiting. The backup offer was the highest of the 6 that had come from the consortium. Sterling looked across the small wooden table at the woman who had once been his mother. "The signing is Monday," he said quietly. "If I am not there, the land goes to the people who have been trying to buy it for 9 months. There is a vote on the county zoning board the following Thursday. Whoever owns the land on the day of that vote controls what gets built there for the next 40 years. "And what would they build there?" Lillian asked. "A waste transfer station," Sterling said. "A very large one. It would serve 4 counties. The trucks would run through 3 small towns to the south of the tract. The river would be downwind of the holding pens. There are 7 schools within a 6-mile radius." "And what would you build there?" He hesitated for a moment. He had not said it out loud to anyone except Marcus Vail and 2 of his senior partners. He had been holding the plan close because he had learned, across 32 years, that quiet plans were the only kind that survived their first contact with the world. "A small community," he said. 220 homes, priced so that families who currently rent in the 4 nearest towns can buy. A clinic, a library, a trade school. The land south of the river stays as protected wetland. I would put it under a permanent conservation easement before I broke ground." Lillian Hayes looked at him for a long moment. "That is a good thing to want to build," she said. "It is also a thing that costs more than it earns for the first 11 years, he said. "It only works because of the way the federal money is structured for that kind of development right now. The consortium does not care about that money. They care about the contracts that come with the transfer station. They have been working on this for longer than I have. They were not expecting me to come in at the end and outbid them with the Caldwells. They are not going to let 460 acres be lost over a single signature on a Monday morning. So they decided to remove the signature, Lillian said. They decided to remove the signature, he agreed. He looked down at his hands. They were perfectly steady. He had always been impressed in a slightly detached way at how steady his hands could be when the rest of him was not. Lillian, he said, I need to ask you a question and I need you to answer it carefully. The man who paid you, the man with the scar along his jaw, when he gave you the envelope at the laundromat, did he tell you anything else about the morning? Anything at all? A name? A second instruction? Anything you were supposed to do if I did not arrive on time? She thought about it. She closed her eyes briefly, the way a person closes their eyes when they are walking through a room in their memory and checking the corners. He told me, she said slowly, that if you did not arrive by 9 o'clock, I was to leave the lobby through the side door, walk 3 blocks east to a small park near the bus station, and wait on the bench under the largest oak tree. He said someone would come and collect the envelope back from me. Did he say who? He did not. Did he say what would happen if you did not wait? She opened her eyes. She looked at him with the patient stillness she had carried since the moment she had walked up to him in the lobby. He did not need to, Sterling, she said. Sterling sat very quietly for a long moment. He understood now exactly what kind of morning he was inside. He understood that Lillian Hayes had walked into that lobby knowing that if she warned him, she would not be allowed to walk back out of the city she had come from. He understood that she had decided before she had ever seen his face in person that the warning was worth the cost. He reached across the table. He laid his hand on top of hers. She did not pull away. She did not move at all. She only looked at him with eyes that had been waiting for 58 years to be looked at in return. We are not going to that park, he said, and you are not going back to that laundromat, not today, not tomorrow, not until this is finished. All right, she said quietly. He took out his phone. He scrolled to a single name in his favorites. He pressed it. The line rang twice. Marcus, he said, I need you to listen carefully, and I need you to do exactly what I tell you. I am not at the Sterling Atlanta. The Charlotte meeting was not real. I have a woman with me whose name is Lillian Hayes. She is in danger. I am in danger. And I am about to tell you a story that is going to take me 20 minutes to tell, and at the end of it I am going to ask you to do 4 things. Are you ready? There was the briefest pause on the other end of the line. Tell me where you are, Marcus Vale said. Marcus Vale did not waste a single second on questions he could ask later. He had been Sterling Beaumont's lawyer for 21 years, and in that time he had learned the exact texture of Sterling's voice at every level of trouble. And he understood without being told that the voice he was hearing this morning was a voice he had only heard twice before. Once on the night the original Caldwell offer had been countered by something Sterling had not been expecting, and once on the afternoon they had buried Walter Beaumont in the cemetery north of Atlanta. The Marigold, Sterling said. Small coffee shop on Forsyth between the dry cleaner and the bookstore. Back table by the kitchen. I know it, Marcus said. 40 minutes. Do not move. Do not call anyone else. Do not use your credit card. Do not let anyone in or out of that booth that does not have my name on their lips. The line ended. Sterling set the phone face down on the wooden table and looked across at Lillian. She had not moved during the call. She had only watched him with the careful attention of a woman who had spent 58 years imagining the shape of the man her son might have become, and was now studying him in person for the first time. 40 minutes, Sterling said. I have waited longer, she said quietly. He almost smiled. He did not quite manage it, but something in his face shifted toward the place where a smile would have been if the morning had been a different morning. He understood in the small, still way a man understands these things, that he was going to spend the rest of his life trying to deserve the patience that the woman across from him had been carrying since 1971. Lillian, he said, while we wait, I am going to ask you to tell me everything you remember about the man at the laundromat. Everything. The way he sat down. The way he held the envelope. Anything he said that did not seem important at the time. The way he looked at the door before he stood up to leave. Anything, she nodded. She drew a small breath, and she began. She told him about the man's coat, which had been wool, dark gray, expensive in a way that did not call attention to itself. She told him about his shoes, which had been polished but worn at the inside heel in the small way that suggested he walked more than he drove. She told him about the watch on his left wrist, a plain steel face on a leather band, set 6 minutes fast. She told him about the small scar along the right edge of his jaw, thin and pale, the kind of scar that came from a single clean cut rather than a long-ago fight. She told him about the way the man had spoken, slow and unhurried, with the soft consonants of someone who had grown up in the upper Midwest and had spent the last 20 years living somewhere else. She told him about the way the man had touched the envelope only with the tips of 2 fingers when he had pushed it across the small folding table to her, and how he had not put his hand on the surface of the table at all. Sterling listened without interrupting. He had spent enough years across boardroom tables from men who did not want to be remembered to recognize what Lillian was describing. The man in the laundromat had been a professional. The kind of professional who did not leave fingerprints on cheap formica. The kind of professional who did not need to threaten an old woman to be sure she would do what he told her. Anything else? He asked. Anything he said when he stood up to leave? She thought about it. He looked at me for a long moment, she said, and then he said, almost gently, that I should not look up your name on the internet between now and Wednesday. He said it would not change anything I needed to do. He said it would only make me afraid, and that fear made people clumsy, and that he did not want me to be clumsy. And then he picked up the empty cup he had not drunk from and he walked out of the laundromat, and I watched him through the front window until he turned the corner at the end of the block. And you looked me up anyway. I looked you up that night, she said. I went to the library on Tuesday morning and I sat at one of the public computers for almost 3 hours. What did you find? She looked at him for a long moment. I found a man, she said, who has built a great deal in this city. I found photographs of buildings with your name on them. I found an article about a school that you paid for in a neighborhood where children had not had a real one in 20 years. I found another about a fund you started to help women who were trying to leave bad marriages with their children. I found a small piece about a hospital wing that no one knew you had paid for until a reporter wrote about it last year. I found a man whose name appeared in many places and whose face appeared in very few, and I understood that you were the kind of person who built things quietly because you did not need to be seen doing them. She paused. And I found a photograph, she said, of you standing beside Walter Beaumont at a ribbon cutting 15 years ago. And I looked at that photograph for a very long time. Sterling did not speak. He could not for a moment. I am not asking you to feel anything about Walter, Sterling, she said quietly. He raised you. He was your father. Whatever I lost when I signed those papers, you gained something I could not have given you, and I have never been small enough to pretend otherwise. But I will tell you this because it is the last thing I will say about him, and then we can speak of other things until your lawyer gets here. She drew a small breath. In every photograph I found of you and Walter, she said, you were standing 1/2 step behind him, and in every photograph I found of you alone, you were standing exactly where you were supposed to be. I do not know what that means to you, but it meant something to me when I saw it. It meant that whatever Walter taught you, you also taught yourself. Sterling looked down at his hands. I did not know, he said, that I had been waiting to hear that. Most sons do not know, she said, until they hear it. Marcus Vale arrived in 34 minutes. Sterling saw him through the steamed front window of the Marigold before he heard the small bell of the door. A tall, lean man in a dark coat that did not quite match his suit, carrying a leather folder in one hand and a small black phone in the other. He scanned the room once, found the back corner, and walked toward them with the unhurried efficiency of a man who had decided long ago that running drew more attention than walking. He stopped beside the small wooden table. He looked at Lillian Hayes. He looked at Sterling. He set the folder down on the table without making a sound. Mrs. Hayes, he said quietly, my name is Marcus Vale. I am Sterling's lawyer, and for the next several days I am also yours. I am going to ask you to trust me on the basis of nothing except that the man sitting across from you has trusted me with the most difficult problems of his life for 21 years, and that I have not yet failed him. I trust you, Lillian said simply. Marcus nodded once. He pulled out the third chair at the small table. He sat down. He did not open the folder yet. Sterling, he said, before I tell you what I have done in the last 40 minutes, I need you to tell me, as precisely as you can, what you want to happen between now and Monday morning at 10 o'clock. Sterling thought about it. He had spent the last 20 minutes thinking about it. He had been doing it while Lillian spoke, in the back of his mind, the way a man works on two problems at the same time when both of them are urgent. 4 things, he said. First, Lillian does not go back to Macon today, tomorrow, or any day until the people who paid her are no longer free to act. She stays somewhere safe, somewhere she cannot be found by anyone who knew her address yesterday. Second, the man with the scar along his jaw is identified and located by the end of the day. I do not want him arrested yet. I want to know who pays him. Third, the Caldwell signing on Monday morning happens. It happens on time in the room we booked with my signature on the paper and with the consortium watching from across the table as the land they have been buying for 9 months becomes something they cannot touch. Fourth, when the signing is done, and only when the signing is done, we hand everything we have to Detective Sandoval at the Atlanta field office, and we let her decide who walks out of which building in handcuffs. Marcus listened without writing anything down. When Sterling finished, he nodded slowly. All right, he said. Then this is what I have already done. Hannah is on her way here. She will be at the back door of this coffee shop in 12 minutes with a car that is not registered to any of our firms. She will take Mrs. Hayes to a small house north of the city that we keep for situations exactly like this one. The house is in the name of a holding company that has never appeared on any document associated with you. There is a woman who lives at the house full-time whose name is Bernice. She is a retired federal marshal. She will be expecting Mrs. Hayes by noon. He turned slightly toward Lillian. Mrs. Hayes, he said, you will not be a prisoner there. You will be a guest. The house has a small library. It has a garden in the back. Bernice is an excellent cook. You will not have access to a telephone that can be traced, but you will have access to a telephone that can call Sterling and me whenever you wish. You will be there for no more than 5 days. After that, we will decide together what comes next. All right, Lillian said. Thank you, Marcus said. He turned back to Sterling. Second item, the man with the scar. Hannah has already pulled the security footage from the lobby of the Sterling Atlanta. She did it through a contact in the hotel's corporate office. She has a clear image of him standing by the front desk this morning at 8:42, 8:48, and again at 9:06 when he made a phone call from the side hallway near the elevators. She has the image running through 3 different databases as we speak. We will have a name by 3 o'clock this afternoon, possibly sooner. And the consortium. The consortium is harder, Marcus said. It is harder because it is not one entity. It is 3 shell companies registered in Delaware, Wyoming, and Nevada, and the directors of all 3 are nominee directors who exist only on paper. But Hannah has been pulling on those threads since 11 o'clock last night, when I called her after the meeting with the Caldwell's attorney on Tuesday. I had a feeling. I did not say it out loud because I did not have anything to say it with, but I had a feeling. And Hannah does not waste her time when I tell her I have a feeling. Sterling looked at him. You started investigating them on Tuesday night. I did, Marcus said. I am sorry I did not tell you. I did not want you to walk into the Sterling Atlanta this morning carrying the weight of a suspicion that I could not yet prove. Marcus, yes, you are a very good lawyer. I know, Marcus said without smiling. He opened the folder for the first time. He laid 3 printed pages on the table between them. The signing on Monday, he said. I have already moved the location. The Caldwell's attorney was reluctant at first. I explained the situation in the precise minimum of detail required to make her understand. She agreed within 10 minutes. The signing will now take place at 9:30 on Monday morning, half an hour earlier than scheduled, in a conference room on the fourth floor of the federal courthouse downtown. Sterling raised one eyebrow. The courthouse. The courthouse, Marcus confirmed. I have arranged with Judge Halloran for the use of the room. He owes me a favor from the Marshall litigation in 2019, and he is the kind of man who pays his debts the moment they are called. The Caldwells will be escorted in by federal marshals. You will be escorted in by federal marshals. The consortium's attorneys will be informed of the new location at 8:15 on Monday morning, which gives them 75 minutes to reach the courthouse, clear security, and present themselves at the conference room. If they are late, the signing proceeds without them. If they object inside a federal building with 2 marshals at the door, and I would like to see how creative they decide to be in that particular setting. Sterling looked at Marcus Vail for a long moment. Then, for the first time since the woman in the brown coat had walked up to him in the lobby of the Sterling Atlanta Hotel 2 hours earlier, Sterling Beaumont smiled. It was a small smile. It did not last long, but it was the kind of smile a man makes when he understands, in the cold, clear way these things become understood, that the morning had begun as a trap and was now becoming something else entirely. Hannah Reyes arrived through the back door of the Marigold exactly when Marcus had said she would. She was a compact woman in her early 40s with short black hair pulled back beneath a dark cap, and she moved through the small kitchen with the quiet authority of a person who had been told once which table she was going to and did not need to be told twice. She nodded at the cook on her way past. The cook did not look up. Sterling understood, in the way a man understands a thing without being told, that Marcus had paid for that lack of looking up some time before any of them had arrived. Hannah crossed to their table. She did not sit. She set a small canvas bag on the empty chair beside Lillian. "Mrs. Hayes," she said quietly, "my name is Hannah. The car is in the alley. We are going to walk out the same way I came in. You will sit in the back seat. I will sit in the front. We will be at the house in 90 minutes. Bernice is making lunch. Do you need anything from your apartment in Macon before we go?" Lillian thought about it. She did not answer immediately. She looked down at her own hands resting on the small wooden table, and Sterling watched her count, in her quiet, careful way, the things she might be leaving behind for the next 5 days. "There is a small wooden box on the top shelf of the closet in my bedroom," she said. "It has photographs in it. None of them matter to anyone except me. But if I do not come back to that apartment, I would like to know that the box is somewhere safe. It will be at the house by tomorrow morning," Hannah said. "I will go myself." "Thank you." Hannah picked up the canvas bag. She glanced at Sterling. There was no warmth in the look, but there was something better than warmth in it. There was the small, steady acknowledgement of a professional who had been told who Lillian Hayes was to him, and who had decided in the moment of being told that the woman in the brown coat was now her responsibility. "I will call you at 6, she said to Marcus, "with the name. 6 is fine." Lillian stood up slowly. She straightened her thin coat. She turned the soft gray scarf once around her neck, in the small, careful way Sterling already recognized as a thing she had done 1,000 times, and then she looked across the table at her son. "Sterling," she said quietly. "Yes, I am going to go with this woman now, and we are going to see each other again very soon. I am telling you that because I want you to know that I am not afraid. I have not been afraid since the moment I decided to walk up to you in that lobby. And I do not want you to spend the next 5 days carrying my fear on top of your own." Sterling stood. He came around the small table. He stood in front of her, and for a long moment he did not know what to do with his hands. He had built a life in which he embraced almost no one. He had not learned the gesture in the place a boy learns it, and he had not found, in the rooms he had grown into, anyone who had taught him. Lillian Hayes looked up at him. Her eyes were very bright. "You do not have to know how," she said quietly. "I know how." She lifted her thin arms and she put them around him, and Sterling Beaumont, who had stood at the head of 300 conference tables and who had outweighted governments and corporations and entire city councils across the length of his career, stood very still in the back of a small coffee shop on Forsyth Street and bowed his head slowly until his cheek rested against the soft gray scarf at the side of her neck. He did not cry. He did not, in any way that another person could have seen, do anything at all. But somewhere inside him, in a small dark room he had not entered since he was 3 years old, a child who had been told for 55 years that his mother was gone, heard, for the first time, the slow, steady beat of a heart he had been listening for without knowing he had been listening. She let him go after a long moment. She stepped back. She nodded once at Hannah, and the two of them walked together toward the back door of the coffee shop, and Sterling watched until the door closed behind them and the small bell stopped ringing, and the warm cinnamon air of the room settled again into the shape it had been in before she came. He sat back down across from Marcus. Marcus did not say anything for a long time. He let Sterling have the silence. And then, when Sterling lifted his eyes again, Marcus opened the leather folder. "All right," he said. "We have 4 days. Let us use them." What followed was the kind of 4 days Sterling would not be able to remember in linear order for the rest of his life. He would remember pieces of it. He would remember sitting in a quiet room on the 11th floor of a building Marcus owned, but did not advertise owning, signing papers that Marcus slid across the table to him one at a time. He would remember Hannah's first phone call at 6 o'clock that Wednesday evening, in which she gave him the name of the man with the scar. Daniel Vinson, former private security contractor, honorable discharge from a unit that did not officially exist. 12 years of work in the gap between corporate intelligence and the kind of work that did not have a name. He would remember Marcus reading the man's history into the room in the same flat tone he used for quarterly reports. He would remember Detective Sandoval arriving at the 11th floor office on Thursday morning. He would remember her listening to the recording from the lobby security audio without changing her expression. He would remember her looking up at him after she had finished and saying only, "Mr. Beaumont, I am going to ask you to do exactly what your lawyer tells you to do for the next 72 hours, and I am going to ask you to let me do my job in the 72nd hour." He would remember the long evening on Friday when he sat alone in the small guest room of the house north of the city, drinking tea that Bernice had made for him, while Lillian sat across from him in a worn green armchair and told him the small, ordinary stories of his first 3 years of life that no one else in the world had ever known. The way he had refused to eat anything orange until he was 18 months old. The song his father had hummed to him from the front porch on summer evenings. The name of the small stuffed bear he had carried with him everywhere until the day they took him away. And he would remember more than any of it the slow, careful way she had said, near the end of that evening, that the bear had been named Sunday. Because, she said, the only day of the week he had ever been quiet. Monday morning arrived clean and cold, the sky above downtown Atlanta the color of brushed steel, and Sterling Beaumont walked into the federal courthouse at 23 minutes past 9 with Marcus Vail on his left and 2 federal marshals walking a half step behind. He wore the same dark suit he had worn 5 days earlier. He carried the same briefcase. He did not look at his phone. The Caldwells were already in the conference room on the 4th floor, all 3 of them. The older brother, Daniel Caldwell, who had spoken for the family in all of the previous meetings, stood up when Sterling walked in and crossed the small carpeted space to shake his hand. He did not ask any questions about the change of location. He did not need to. Marcus had explained, in the careful minimum of detail required, what kind of morning was unfolding around the signing, and the 3 Caldwells had decided among themselves on Sunday evening that they would rather sign their land away inside a federal building than spend another week wondering whether the deal they had chosen would survive the people who had wanted it to fail. At 9:31, the consortium's attorneys arrived. There were 3 of them. They had cleared security with 5 minutes to spare. They walked into the conference room with the careful neutrality of men who had been told, on the short walk up from the lobby, exactly what kind of room they were walking into. They did not protest the location. They did not protest the time. They sat down across from the Caldwells. They opened their folders. They did what attorneys do when the morning has stopped going the way their clients had paid for it to go. The signing took 22 minutes. The Caldwells signed first. Sterling signed second. Marcus countersigned as the attorney of record. A clerk from the courthouse notarized each page. The deed transferred. 460 acres of old farmland along the slow brown curve of the Chattahoochee River, with a small bed of marigolds at the edge of the meadow where a freight worker's widow had once grown them in a different life, became, at 9:53 on a Monday morning in late October, the property of Sterling Beaumont Holdings, LLC. With a permanent conservation easement attached to the southern wetland and a development plan for 220 homes filed simultaneously with the county zoning office 4 blocks away, Detective Sandoval arrested Daniel Vinson at his apartment in Sandy Springs at 10:07. He did not resist. The two principals of the consortium were arrested in their respective offices within the following 2 hours. The case against them would take 11 months to come to trial. It would result in convictions for conspiracy, attempted murder, fraud, and a small constellation of related charges that Sterling would not bother to memorize. Vinson would name his employers within 48 hours of his arrest, in exchange for a sentencing recommendation that would still see him incarcerated until he was almost 70 years old. Sterling did not attend most of the proceedings. He had been there once at the arraignment, and that had been enough. In the spring, when the case was still moving through its early motions, Sterling drove north of the city on a Saturday morning in a car he was driving himself for the first time in 11 years. He arrived at the small house just before noon. Bernice met him at the door. She had become, over the winter, something close to a friend, and she stepped aside without saying anything and pointed with her chin toward the garden at the back of the house. Lillian was sitting on a small wooden bench beneath a flowering dogwood tree. She was wearing a light blue sweater Sterling had bought her in December. She had a small notebook open on her lap, and she was writing in it slowly, the way a woman writes when she has decided that the things she is putting down on the page are worth the time it takes to put them down carefully. She looked up when he came around the corner. She smiled. "You drove yourself," she said. "I drove myself. I thought you might." He sat down beside her on the bench. The dogwood was full of small white flowers. A bird he could not name was singing somewhere in the hedge behind them. The sun was warm on the back of his hands. "Lillian," he said. "Yes. I have been thinking about something for a long time, and I do not want to say it the wrong way. So I am going to say it slowly. All right. There is a small white house off Vineville Avenue in Macon," he said. "It is still standing. I had someone look. It is owned now by a couple who bought it in 1994. They have lived in it for 32 years. They raised 2 daughters in it. They do not want to sell it." I asked carefully. They were polite, but they said no. Lillian smiled softly. "Good," she said. "It should belong to someone who has loved it for a long time." "That is what I thought too," Sterling said. "So I bought the house next door." She turned her head slowly to look at him. "The house next door," she repeated. "It is a smaller house," he said. 2 rooms and a kitchen and a porch that leans a little to the left. It was empty for almost a year. I had it cleaned. I had the porch repaired. I had a garden put in at the back, tomatoes. Collared, a bed of marigolds. I did not pick any of those. The woman I hired to do it asked me what to plant. I told her to plant whatever a woman who had lived on Vineville Avenue in 1970 would have wanted in her garden. She knew exactly what to plant. Lillian was very still. "It is yours," he said. "If you want it, there is no condition. You do not have to live in it. You do not have to visit it. You can sell it tomorrow and use the money for anything you wish. But it is yours. The deed is in your name. It has been in your name since Thursday." She did not speak for a long moment. She looked down at the notebook in her lap. She closed it slowly. She set it on the bench beside her. And then, in the small, careful way she did most things, she reached over and took Sterling Beaumont's hand in both of hers, and she held it the way a woman holds the hand of a son she has finally been given enough time to know. This story is a reminder that the people who love us most are not always the people we expect to find. Sometimes they are the people we were told to forget. Sometimes they walk up to us in a hotel lobby on an ordinary morning, in a faded brown coat, with the truth of who we are folded carefully in their pocket. Courage does not always look like courage. Sometimes it looks like a small woman with steady hands and a soft gray scarf, who has decided that the morning she has waited 58 years for is worth more than the life she might lose by speaking. Listen to the quiet voices. Pay attention to the strangers who know your name. And never assume that the door you were told was closed behind you is not still being watched, on the other side, by someone who has been waiting all this time for you to look back.